As we know, ADHD is a neurological condition. That's, very well established, and it primarily involves kind of the front of your brain, kind of right behind your forehead, and it involves dopamine and things of that sort. So there's a whole lot of neurology at work here when it comes to ADHD. And certainly the current, very stimulating, lots of distractions, too many things going on, makes these ADHD information processing weaknesses a little bit more obvious. So like ADHD is going to stand out more in our current world than it might have in, prior times in history when there wasn't quite as much information to manage. So, that's the neurology side. I think that part's very clear. But, of course, neurology drives psychology, that the psychology of you as a person and your personality and how you see yourself and how you relate to other people and, how, what do you do in the face of challenges. There's that part of it as well. So ADHD is a part of who you are, but it's not all of who you are. But having said that, if you do have ADHD and certain kinds of, specific information processing weaknesses or executive functioning weaknesses, if you have that, you're more likely to encounter certain kinds of experiences in your life. So, for example, just kind of like the cliche example, kids with ADHD are more likely to evoke negative reactions from parents about homework compared to kids who don't have ADHD. So now that's kind of I'm making a broad sweeping statement. It's not true for everyone with ADHD, and there are plenty of kids without ADHD who have negative interactions with parents about homework. But kids with ADHD have more of those, or they're more likely to forget something important that was told them, so they show up at the wrong place at the wrong time. Or, they have trouble sitting still if they were hyperactive, so they get a lot more like, stop it, sit down, don't touch that. Don't do that. Don't say that. So the neurology of who we are has an effect on the kinds of experiences that we have in life. And those experiences then affect our psychological mindset. So how do we, like I said before, how do we see ourselves? How do we see other people? When we have a challenge in front of us, do we sort of rise up and tackle it, or do we shy away because it tends to not work out well? But I think it's important to note here that it's not just neurology, and it's not just the events, it's how do we interpret the events? What meaning do you make of the events? So, if you forget to bring in your homework, let's say, there's a lot of different ways to interpret it. One of them is to say, homework is stupid, I don't know why they give this to me. Another one is to say, my teacher is an idiot, I hate her. Another thing is to say, damn, I really need to not do that anymore. From now on, when I finish my homework, it's got to go into my backpack. No matter what, I got to put it in the backpack because if I leave it on my desk, I'm more likely to forget it. So same exact event, but, we interpret it in different kinds of ways. It's the interpretations, then, that are important. The events are important, but our interpretations are really much more important. So, and it's not simply that different people will interpret the same event differently. It's also that the same person can interpret an event differently over time. So there's perhaps one way that you understood a situation when it happened, and then, over time, which could be 20 minutes later or it could be 20 years later, you reflect back and you say, as I think about that, now with a little more perspective or maybe a little bit more wisdom, now I can see that actually it was this, or there was some other thing going on there, and now I understand that in a way I never did before. So, it's not just that, so it doesn't just vary by different people, it also varies within a person. And of course, a lot of what we do in therapy is helping people change their interpretations of events. Therapy is not time travel where we change the event. We change how you see the event, what you think about the event, and how you feel about the event. That, this is why an ADHD diagnosis can be such a powerful thing. Because, getting diagnosed with ADHD, especially if you're an adult by the time you get diagnosed, doesn't change a single event in your childhood, but it sure changes how you see those events. So it's that old, lazy, stupid, or crazy kind of stuff. It's like, it's not that I'm lazy, it's that I had trouble focusing on boring things that don't have an immediate deadline. Oh, that's an ADHD thing. Got it. Now I get that. or, whatever. So, there's a lot of power simply in understanding, oh, this is ADHD. In this whole process, there's this kind of like self-reinforcing cycle that develops in the sense that how we interpret past events affects our current mindset. And our current mindset then determines how we interpret current events, which then determines our future mindset. So the past leads into the present, leads into the future, and there's definitely a momentum effect that can occur here. And that's, of course, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. It kind of depends. That, if you see yourself as, I don't know, kind of, let's say, a fraud, where it's like, other people think I'm pretty good at this stuff or I'm pretty smart, but man, if they only knew what it took for me to get this stuff done, they would not be that impressed. Like, if that's the mindset that you go in with based on what your track record is and how you've interpreted past events, that's going to affect how you interpret the current successes that you have. And if you feel that you're a fraud, you're going to discount your current successes. Okay, well, this time I got lucky. Next time, who knows? Or whatever. And then it maintains itself. As opposed to, a different mindset is to say, you know what, sometimes I do get lucky, but I also work my butt off. Like, I work really hard on this stuff. I work twice as hard as some of these people. I should feel twice as good about myself, not twice as bad. The fact that I'm willing to work twice as hard is the important thing, not the fact that I have to work twice as hard, or, whatever the example might be. So, hopefully the goal of this teleclass here is to give you some ideas, to give you some ways of perhaps reinterpreting some of the things that happen so that you can change some of that negative momentum and build some resilience so you've got some good positive momentum to carry you forward as you hit bumps in the road, because you will indeed hit bumps in the road. Again, just to kind of reinforce it, by changing our interpretations, we can change the impact, the psychological impact that an event has on us. And from that, we can then change what we do about it. Because if you see yourself as, I screw things up, I always screw things up, and therefore I always will, like, where are you going with that? Nowhere good. As opposed to if you see it as, I had a lot of troubles before, now I understand myself better, and with this new knowledge I can understand why, despite good effort, I always had those same troubles. Like before I got diagnosed with ADHD, I didn't understand it, now I do. And now that I understand it, now I can do something different. That's kind of that transformative thing that can happen when you get a diagnosis of ADHD, or just in general when you understand yourself a little bit better. So what we're going to do here tonight then is talk about 3 specific, what I call mindset traps. Now there's more than 3 kind of overall, and there's probably, I don't know, like there's tons of them if we really kind of got picky and whatever and interviewed lots of people and whatever. But we're going to talk about 3 specific ones, 3 of the more common ones for folks with ADHD. Now, I think it's worth pointing out here, as I kind of often do, that this stuff that we're going to talk about today, it's not unique to folks with ADHD. It's not like folks with ADHD invented them. But folks with ADHD might employ these or might fall into these traps a little bit more frequently and might benefit from using some of the strategies that we talk about a little bit more compared to some folks without ADHD. In terms of the traps here, so they're kind of traps of thinking. They're that when we get in a certain mindset, it affects our thinking, which then kind of carries itself forward. I think it's important to note here that there is indeed a certain logic to these mental traps, these mindset traps, that, they're based on the experiences that you've had over the course of your life and how you've interpreted those experiences. So it's not like this kind of psychotic, schizophrenic sort of thing that you're like making up crazy ideas based on nothing. They're ideas based on the events that happen to you. There is a certain logic, which is, it's good to know that you're not completely crazy. But, the bad news of that is because there is a certain logic, that's what kind of maintains it, that there is a certain reality to these mental traps. So that's the part that makes it a little bit harder to break it. What also makes it a little bit harder to change some of these traps is that they offer some benefit, that if they didn't offer any benefit at all, like we wouldn't use them because we would find something else instead. The problem is that the mindset traps, the benefit they offer is less than the benefit that we would get from a more productive kind of a mindset. Either that or they carry a much higher price somewhere else. For example, the first mental mindset here that we're going to talk about is either avoidance or protective pessimism. So, avoiding something that makes you uncomfortable brings a benefit. Ooh, I hate doing that. If I don't do it, then I feel better. And that's good. I like feeling better. Except then when I avoid this now, I pay a bigger price later. Damn, that part I don't like as much. So there's always a benefit associated with it, and sometimes if you can identify the benefit, then, you're in a better position, I think, you're in a better position than do something differently about it. Let's talk a little bit more about the first one. And the setup here is we're going to talk first about, what is the mindset trap. So I'll kind of explain it to you, how it works, what the deal is with it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some solutions. So I'm going to offer kind of a number of solutions for each of these. So, here's what it is, here are the problems, and then here are the solutions. And this is kind of a format I use for a lot of different presentations because I find that, kind of works. I'm all about the solutions, but you have to identify the problems. You have to identify how you get there. You have to understand the situation before you can get to solutions that actually, mean anything and are on target. In terms of avoidance, avoidance is tempting. That given a choice, we would all like to avoid the things that are boring, that make us uncomfortable, that tend to not go well, that we're not really sure about, that kind of a situation. Avoidance is a natural feeling to have. I wish I didn't have to deal with this. Now, there's a certain amount of neurology at work here in that people with ADHD tend to have difficulty with self-activating. And this is one of the executive functions, and it's the ability to kind of self-generate motivation. So in other words, this isn't due for a week, but, maybe I'll kind of get going on it now because it would be nice to have that done early. As opposed to, oh my God, this is due in 3 hours, I better get going on it now. So when it's due in 3 hours, that's not self-generated motivation, that's externally generated motivation. It's the deadline that's motivating you. As opposed to self-activation is the ability to get up and going on it before the deadline. There is indeed some neurology at work, and we know that, and there's studies that have shown that. So, this is why folks with ADHD tend to procrastinate. The general process that happens for all of us when we avoid something is that the current benefits of what we're doing or the current cost of doing the thing we don't want to do is given more weight compared to the future ones. So in other words, I don't really feel like dealing with that paperwork now. I would rather watch TV, which is much more fun. The fun of watching TV in the moment versus the pain of filling out the paperwork is given more priority compared to the pain of if I fill out the paperwork tomorrow, that's going to be even worse because there's more paperwork or I won't have time, I'm going to have to rush or something. So, we give priority to the current situation even if we pay a bigger price later. And the technical term for this is temporal discounting, in case anyone's really interested in the details of it. But in addition to the neurology, there's also a certain amount of psychology at work here, kind of as you might expect. It's not just about neurology. So if you have ADHD or not, but if you have a track record where certain things, certain tasks at least, have tended to involve more struggle and more failure or less desirable result, if you rack up enough of those bad experiences, it becomes a little bit of a no-brainer to want to avoid that task. So if doing paperwork tends to be a really unenjoyable experience for you, you'd have to be kind of stupid actually to say, oh, yay, paperwork, I love that. Or, it didn't work out the last 100 times, but I don't know, maybe 101 is the magic number, and maybe this is the one that the paperwork works out great. So, there's a logic to that kind of avoidance. But beyond this sort of obvious logic, where we get ourselves into trouble is when we rationalize bad choices by kind of talking ourselves into it. So that's the whole thing of I'm kind of tired right now, so I'm going to leave this for tomorrow, and I'm going to wake up early, and I'm going to do it then when I've had a good night's sleep and I'm refreshed, which, it's not insane to say that at all, but it's kind of like, when we say stuff like that, we're kind of kidding ourselves. Or when we say, well, I don't really want to do it now, but I'll have time to do it later. It's those little white lies that we tell ourselves. And we all tell ourselves these little white lies sometimes. But, the problem is that if we were really honest with ourselves, we would know that it's kind of bogus. Like, you know what? No, I'm not going to wake up early to do it. That usually doesn't work out. Maybe once in a blue moon it does, but mostly it doesn't. So I need to just bite the bullet now and do it. That's the sort of more honest approach. I don't want to do it. I hate this stuff. It tends to not work out well, but bite the bullet. I'm just going to do it right now. But let's talk about protective pessimism here. So protective pessimism it's kind of related to avoidance. It's a little bit different, but it's also they overlap a little bit. So the idea of protective pessimism is this. It basically boils down to, if at first you don't succeed, then don't get your hopes up. So, the idea is that although it's good to be an optimist, because if you're an optimist, you're going to be willing to try something and you're going to do it, and maybe it works out. Maybe it doesn't, but you know what? Maybe it does. You give it a shot. But the problem with optimism is it risks disappointment. If you try something, you get your hopes up, those hopes may come crashing down if it doesn't work. This then creates a situation where, perhaps trying something, putting in some effort, and having it not work out is then kind of seen by you or maybe by someone else, and maybe first it's seen by someone else and then you learn to see it this way too. But trying and failing is seen as some sort of a character judgment. So it's not simply, this one didn't work out. It's what's wrong with you that this didn't work out. So if that's the case, where you feel like, there's going to be some kind of character indictment if you try it and it doesn't work out, it becomes safer to blame failure on kind of half-hearted efforts, in the sense of like, oh, well, it didn't work out, but you know what, I hardly really put any effort into it. Or, yeah, I threw that together in the last 20 minutes, so of course it wasn't really any good. So it's kind of playing it safe, because you don't really kind of invest yourself into the task, see how you do, and then get some feedback about it. So it's safe, and that's good, but you also don't really go anywhere with that kind of a mindset, and that's kind of the price that's paid. Now, unfortunately, pessimism is kind of, being pessimistic about how certain things might go. It's actually kind of a reasonable thing if you have ADHD, which has not been diagnosed and it hasn't been treated, because folks with ADHD tend to be less consistent. Sometimes they do phenomenal, and then sometimes, for unclear reasons, it just doesn't come together. And that becomes, if it's hard to predict, it's hard to be optimistic. And if it's hard to be optimistic, it's easy to be pessimistic. So, take this a little bit further. And being anxious about something beforehand or being depressed about it working out is actually kind of a reasonable extension of that pessimism. Folks with untreated ADHD are more likely to be anxious and depressed, and the reason is they, unfortunately, got a few more things to be anxious and depressed about. So, it's easy to come by this avoidance or this pessimism. But that doesn't mean that you're kind of forever destined to live with it. So let's get into the solutions then. So the first solution here, and there's many more than this, but we'll cover 6 or so for each of the mindsets. So the first is figure out the specifics for a project that's too vague. Like, either you don't know what to do or you don't know how it's supposed to end up. You're not sure how you're supposed to do it. We all tend to avoid ambiguous, unclear, vague situations. So if it's vague, nail it down. Either nail it down yourself or find out from the other person, what am I supposed to be doing here? Get them to nail it down for you so that you're more likely to say, all right, that's what all right, cool. Well, that I can do. Another strategy here is to create more immediate rewards. So the least motivating thing is, do this boring thing now, and 10 years from now, you're going to get a really nice reward. So the reward is too far away to be motivating. And, we all have a time horizon, which is basically how far out in time do we look, and how far out is something, or how far out can something be while still having an effect on our actions in the moment. So if something, a year from now is not motivating enough, or something a month from now is not motivating enough, then it just means you need to create a more immediate reward to, break the big thing up into little pieces, and if I do this much, I get a little bit of a reward. If I do that much, I get a little bit more, and if I get that, I do a little bit more. So to bring in some more immediate rewards if those long-term things just don't motivate you enough. Now, as a sub-point of this, it's much more motivating to work towards a positive or something good, something you want, than it is to work away from a negative or away from a punishment. So in other words, it's that old thing of it's more motivating to tell a kid, if you do your homework, then you can do something fun, as opposed to if you don't do your homework, then you're going to be punished. And then, all of the adult equivalents of that. So working away from a punishment will get people to do the bare minimum, but not much more, as opposed to working towards something good, towards something that they're interested in, that's important to them, or something that's enjoyable. That's how you bring out more of the best in someone. So you might need to create some of these rewards, but even if you have to create them, if it works, then it works. Another solution here is to vividly think about what are the future benefits of doing this thing now, or what are the future costs of not doing this thing now, in order to make the future kind of loom larger in your thinking. So this is kind of the reverse of that temporal discounting that I mentioned, that, we tend to downplay the future and play up the present. So if we can intentionally and in as much detail as possible think about the future. Okay, if I have to wake up early tomorrow to do this, what is that going to be like? I hate waking up early, or, it's bad enough as it is waking up at 7, but if I have to wake up at 6, that's going to be even worse, and I'm actually going to be more tired. I'm not going to be less tired. I'm not going to be better rested. I'm going to be more tired because it takes me some time to kind of crank my brain up, and it makes tomorrow's day even longer, and, so really kind of thinking about the future as vividly as possible, as opposed to oh yeah, I'll just do it tomorrow. That'll be fine. Which is kind of what we like to do. We like to believe that idea of it'll be fine tomorrow. So, really kind of be honest with yourself about what tomorrow or next month is going to bring. Another solution here is the idea of of separating feeling from acting, or in other words, do it even if you don't want to. Do it even if you feel anxious. Do it even if you feel uncertain about it. Now, often we kind of tell ourselves, well, once I feel ready to do it, I'll do it. Or once I feel comfortable in doing it, then I'll do it. But the problem is that sometimes, for certain tasks, you're never going to want to do it. You're never going to say, boy, I really feel like sorting receipts from my taxes. That seems like really a lot of fun to do right now, and that's the best thing I can think of to do right now. That will never, ever happen. So some things you just need to do it even though you are not going to want to do it. So having said that, for some things, I think it's helpful to remind ourselves that we feel comfortable about it after we've tried it, not necessarily before. So kind of that's the old thing of once I feel comfortable speaking in public, then I will begin speaking in public, which of course it doesn't work that way. For certain things, you need to speak in public, let's say, even though you feel uncomfortable, because as you do it and practice it, you will get better at it, your comfort will increase, and then you will feel comfortable. So in the beginning, you got to do it despite the fact that you feel uncomfortable. So if it's a skill to be learned, this is something really to keep in mind, as opposed to if it's something that just needs to be done, like sorting paperwork. There's not a lot of skill to be learned in sorting paperwork for the most part. For that, you just got to do it. You're never going to want to do it. Just do it. Another solution here is to accept that risk is a requirement for success, that anything worthwhile, anything interesting involves a certain amount of risk. But that's okay. If it involves risk, what it means is sometimes you win, and unfortunately it means also sometimes you lose. So don't put your entire self-worth on the line in the sense that I'm going to try this, and if it doesn't work out, it means, I'm a terrible person or something. It's that Stuart Smalley kind of a thing. That, accept the fact that even the people who are great at what they do are not great at everything that they do, and sometimes it doesn't work out. And then the final strategy here, or final solution is, if you're anxious, if you're depressed, and if it's more than just a little bit, if it's more than just kind of passing, do something about it. See a therapist, or, do some reading about it, talk to others, perhaps medication if it's serious enough, but do something about it, because if you're anxious and depressed, everything else is going to be a whole lot harder. Let's take a look at the next mental trap here, the next mindset trap, which is what's known as black and white thinking. So this is sometimes called all or nothing thinking as well. They're kind of interchangeable. So basically, when we do black and white thinking, we're kind of oversimplifying the world. And, you can catch yourself doing black and white thinking when you start using words like always or never. I am always the one who whatever, and you, my wife, you never ever do this. So that's a very black and white kind of a thing. Or, one thing is all good and something else is all bad. All Democrats are like this and all Republicans are like that. Or if we start saying only or never, I'm the only one and every time or never, or, it's putting everything kind of at the extreme so it doesn't see anything in the middle. Now, the problem with this kind of black and white thinking is when we're in this kind of mindset, anything that's in the middle winds up getting rounded up or rounded down because we really only have two categories and everything has to fit into it. I am always the one who does this. Well, okay, I guess sometimes actually you do it also, and I guess there are some times I don't actually do it. So maybe it's not always me. No, but it is. It's always me. I'm always the one who does this, and you never ever do that. So that's that sort of like rounding up, rounding down. Now, the problem with that is if reality is not, in fact, black and white, it means we need to kind of distort reality in order to make it fit. And that's not really a good way to go through life, is distorting reality, because if you change what you see, then you can't make good choices about what you do. Although most of us, most of us tend to live in a world of grays, we tend to go black and white when we get emotionally fired up. The more emotional you are, you're much more likely to go black and white. So like you use a lot of always and never when you're fired up, and then when you calm down, you say, well, okay, I guess that's not really quite true what I said, but, I think perhaps it's mostly true even if it's not entirely true. The solution here, couple different, big picture solutions. One of them is look for the grays. So if black and white thinking is oversimplistic, look for the grays, look for the complexities. And the reason is that black and white thinking is demotivating, because if you feel like this has to be perfect in order for it to be worth doing. Or if I don't do a great job on this, my boss is going to, be, unhappy about it because he's always unhappy about the stuff that I do. That's demotivating because it's kind of like if you don't do it great, if everything else rounds down to bad, I don't know, maybe it's not worth giving it any good effort, because if it's not going to work out great, then don't bother. So I think it's a matter of, recognizing that sometimes partial credit really does indeed mean something. It might not be the very best report this boss has ever seen, but you know what, it was pretty good. It was certainly good enough. So away we go on to the next thing that needs to be done. Another strategy here is to notice what went well, or what are the positives, the situation or what you did or what someone else did, even in the worst experiences. So even if something worked out badly, where you really kind of blew it, what did you do well in that situation? What are the parts of it that you did do well? Or what are the things that somebody else did well? So for example, in couples therapy, we sometimes do this thing called positive attending, which is don't just look for the things that your spouse does that annoys you. Look for the things they do that you're happy about, that you're appreciative. So really make that effort to look for the things. And that's one of the ways in couples therapy that we get couples out of this, really deadlocked, we're mad at each other and really unhappy with each other kind of a mindset. Or another example of this is to think about, okay, what did I learn from the experience? That really did not work out well, and that kind of sucks, but what did I learn from it? Like, how am I smarter now than I was beforehand? Because if you can pull some good ideas out of it, then maybe it wasn't all a bad experience. Another kind of, like big umbrella solution here to get out of black and white thinking is to redefine success. That, in other words, success doesn't mean that you're batting 1,000 or knocking them out of the park on everyone, but, to sort of broaden your definition of success. So, in other words, broaden your definition of success might be, okay, so this isn't going to be the best report my boss has ever seen, but if he's mostly pretty happy and he only gives me a few corrections to make and I can kind of knock him out pretty quick, okay, maybe that's not so bad. Maybe that's pretty good, at least for this boss it is, or at least for this report or for this week or whatever. The broader your definition of success is, the more willing you're going to be to take a chance. It's kind of like, if you're throwing darts at a dartboard and if the only thing that counts as success is hitting a bullseye, don't bother because the odds of that are really low. As opposed to if I put it on the board, that's pretty good. Now, you can't lower your, redefine success so it's so broad that if you hit anything anywhere on the wall that the board is on, that counts as a success or a victory. You need to have some standards, but standards that are too high really just wind up being kind of demotivating. One way of doing this, one kind of more specific way of broadening your definition of success is to approach challenges like a scientist, in the sense that there are times that you need to try something in order to see whether it's going to work or not. There will sometimes come a point where you look at something, you think about it, you research it, you talk to people, and you just run out. You're not discovering anything new. There comes a point where it's you just got to try it. Give it a shot, see what happens. You do it, you get some feedback. If it works out, awesome, sweet, that was good. I'm glad that worked out. If it doesn't work out, then you're all right, well, that didn't work. Now I know a little bit more about this than I did the first time. I do a bunch of work on my house. I'm in the middle of a endless bathroom renovation. And every time I work on my house, I'm put in this position where I'm I don't know what to do. Let's try this. Or I do know what to do. This is what to do. And sometimes that doesn't work out. And hopefully, if I'm smart, I'm able to kind of step back from it and say, okay, that didn't work. Why didn't it work? What does that teach me? What do I know about this? And then what's my next step? So you can learn something which you can then apply forward to the next situation. Then finally here, kind of quoting our friend Stephen Colbert, moving on, that if you try it, if it doesn't work out, don't waste more time beating yourself up about the fact that it didn't work out. If it didn't work out, get back up. Okay, why didn't that work? So to say that, kind of beating ourselves up or being down or being saying this doesn't work out, so forget it, I'm not even going to bother trying. That just kind of wastes more time rather than just saying all right, that sucks, back in the saddle. What else can I do here? What are my other options? What are my other ideas? How else can I approach this? That's the thing that's going to move it along much faster. And beating ourselves up really doesn't teach us anything new, and it doesn't get the job done any quicker. Our third and final mental mindset trap here is called self-mistrust. This is a concept I came across, a while ago, and I don't know whose idea this is. I wish I could give credit to whoever thought of this idea because I think it's a great concept. The basic idea here is that a lot of folks with ADHD suffer from what's called self-mistrust, which is the belief that they can't necessarily trust themselves to do the right things at the right times. Because of that inconsistency that is so common among folks with untreated ADHD, it makes it a hard situation because it's can I trust myself to do the things that I say that I'm going to do, whether I say it to myself, whether I promise somebody else. If I say I'm going to do it, can I believe that I actually will? Or, here I am at the end of my day. Let me reflect back on my day. Did I do everything that I should have? Or are there some ticking time bombs out there? That email I was supposed to send and I didn't send, and I don't know it now, but I'm going to get a pissed off email tomorrow. Like that's the ticking time bomb. So, unfortunately, like in that kind of a situation, before your ADHD is diagnosed, before you understand it, before it's treated, so you get a better track record, you can't just tell someone in that situation, oh, no, you're fine, just, believe in yourself, because their track record says something different. Their track record says, I don't know if I should believe in myself. I would like to, and in some ways I do, but you know what, for some of this stuff, like, I don't know that I can. Like, if I say, 4 o'clock, I'll meet you tomorrow at 4, I don't know that I can believe that I'll actually be there at 4. I know I should. I know all the reasons why, and I would like to, but you know what, I don't know if I can. That's the self-mistrust that comes in with ADHD. Let's talk about solutions then. First of all, treating your ADHD, getting on top of your ADHD, it changes the odds. It makes new things possible. It makes certain outcomes more likely, certain positive outcomes more likely, certain negative outcomes less likely. This is the power of an ADHD diagnosis. Learn as much as you can about ADHD. Steal other people's good ideas. I use this line a lot. I hate reinventing the wheel. I do not have time to reinvent the wheel. So, if other people have thought up good ideas before me, I do not need to spend all my time thinking up good ideas. So get good ideas from books, from magazines, from teleclasses like this one, from CHAD conferences, CHAD support groups, whatever. Anywhere it is, get good ideas if you can. If you've got some clinicians that you're seeing, whether it's a therapist, a coach, a prescriber, an organizer, if you feel that they just don't know as much about ADHD as they need to, or just the chemistry isn't there, shop around, find somebody new. This is important stuff. And sometimes it means you got to spend some extra time finding someone, and sometimes it means you got to pay a few extra bucks for someone who knows what they're doing, rather than settling for someone who's just kind of like so effective. Now, having said that, even if you really do get on top of your ADHD and you buy every book out there and you even read some of them and, all this stuff, still I think you need to set realistic expectations. You're not going to be Superman, but that's okay. You don't have to be Superman. So, it's that balancing act between push yourself to do the very best that you can while also accepting that sometimes it ain't going to work out so well and that, it's unfortunate, but it is okay and people wind up kind of moving on and still having good experiences on the next thing. Another solution here to self-mistrust is focus on creating better processes and better systems. This is especially true for the systems and the habits that just don't naturally fall into place. And the reason is the habits that do easily fall into place, you're already doing them. Like, we don't need to talk about those because you got those covered and you've had them covered for a long time. The habits that are important at this point are probably the ones that don't naturally fall into place. Focus on the process. I've got a saying that, focus on a good process and the outcome will follow. So rather than focusing on the outcome, focus on creating that good process that will then increase the odds of bringing you that good outcome. I sometimes, have a question either from, a client themselves or from their spouse, or from someone about their spouse where, they say, I want to be able to trust myself or I want to be able to trust him or her, but I don't know if I can. I want to have faith that when I tell myself I'm going to do this or when they tell me that they're going to do it, I want to have faith that it'll actually happen. And it's a good question, especially if it's been kind of a long haul, So in those situations, what I tell people is faith comes from good processes, not from good intentions. That, in other words, to say, this time I'm going to do it. You know what? Maybe you will, and I believe your good intentions, but the problem is you've had good intentions all those other times also. So good intentions alone are not enough to get the job done. But good processes, that is something you can bet money on. So in other words, to say, I'll meet you there tomorrow at 4, and to just say it and hold it in your head, meet them tomorrow at 4, I don't know, maybe it'll happen, but you know what, maybe it won't. As opposed to, I'll meet you tomorrow at 4, and here I am writing myself a note, and I'm putting it into my schedule, or I'm setting an alarm for myself, or I'm asking my wife to remind me, or like doing something like that, using a better process by which you remember the things that you set up. That is what faith is based on. It's based on realistic. It's realistic. It's not just sort of based on, I like the idea of meeting you at 4. It's based on, I've done things that are going to make it more likely that I'm going to actually meet you there at 4. And it's the processes that are more sustainable in the sense that if all I do is say, I'm going to meet you at 4, and then I hold it in my head, I might get lucky this time, and it might work out this time, but it may not work out next time, as opposed to if I get into the habit of like always putting it in my schedule, then it's much more likely to happen, for example. Those are, kind of a little bit quick, but, I kind of did it on purpose because it gives us some time here for questions at the end. So those are 3 of the mindset traps, and hopefully then, you could identify with some of the traps, and then also, more importantly, identify with some of the solutions that I offered, and hopefully there's some good ideas that came out of that.